Have you ever seen something so out of place, so heartbreaking, that the whole world seems to stop for just a moment? On a rainy afternoon at the edge of Santa Monica Pier, a battered old suitcase sat alone, soaked, abandoned, and silent. But inside, hidden beneath a threadbare blanket, was a terrified German shepherd, her eyes wide with fear, trembling as the storm rolled in. No collar, no name, just a single rain-smudged note. I tried, but he's broken. Tonight, we're not just telling the story of an abandoned dog. This is about the moments that test our compassion and the second chances that can heal us all. Stay with us, because what happened next will change the way you look at hope forever. The afternoon was slipping into evening when Marcus Evans arrived, driving the battered old van of the Santa Monica Animal Shelter. Marcus wasn't the first responder type. He was a quiet, middle-aged man, built more for gentle handling and paperwork than emergencies. But tonight, he was the one dispatched as the sky darkened and the first droplets of rain began to fall in earnest. Marcus hesitated when he saw the crowd, but the call had said dog, possibly abandoned, possibly injured, urgent. He was no stranger to sadness, but something about this job felt different, heavier. Maybe it was the way people kept glancing back at the suitcase as if haunted, or maybe it was the low roll of thunder that shook the pier and reminded him, as everything seemed to, of the sister he'd lost years before. He carried that grief with him always, a companion in quiet moments, a shadow in every decision he made. The storm broke with a sudden violent crash. Umbrellas turned inside out, families rushed for shelter, and within minutes, the pier was nearly empty, just a spattering of stubborn tourists and Marcus, standing alone in the rain with a towel clutched under one arm. He approached the suitcase slowly, talking in a low, soothing voice even though he doubted the dog could hear him over the wind. Still, she must have sensed something. The dog flinched but did not bolt, her eyes fixed on Marcus with a mix of raw panic and desperate hope. He crouched, holding out the towel, careful not to block her escape route. "Hey there, sweetheart," he murmured, voice trembling, not just from cold, but from the pressure of old memories. "You're not alone, not tonight, I promise." The dog, her ribs visible under matted fur, her body too thin, her gaze too old for her age, didn't move. She didn't bark or growl. She simply stared, frozen. Marcus took a risk. Inch by inch, he slid the suitcase open further. The dog pressed back, curling tighter, her tail tucked so far it nearly disappeared. For a moment, Marcus saw not a dog, but his own reflection, how he'd locked away his pain, refusing to be touched by the world. He wrapped the towel around her as gently as he could, feeling the animals trembling beneath his hands. The dog whimpered, a sound that broke through the rain and the low rumble of the surf. Marcus whispered, "It's okay, you're safe now." Lifting her out was a slow process. She wouldn't let go of the blanket, clutching it in her teeth, as if it were her last lifeline, and Marcus let her keep it, understanding more than he could say. Cradling her close, he made for the van, shielded her from the worst of the wind, and climbed inside, where warmth and quiet settled around them like a fragile promise. Driving through the rain-soaked streets back to the shelter, Marcus glanced down at his passenger, now named Harper in his mind, because she looked like someone who needed a fresh start, a name untouched by loss. At the shelter, the harsh fluorescent lights and metallic clatter of cages must have felt like another kind of storm. Harper curled around her suitcase the moment Marcus set her down, refusing food, water, or any touch. She kept her gaze fixed on the battered luggage, every muscle taut, refusing to acknowledge any of the gentle words Marcus or the staff offered. She shook so violently that her nails clicked on the linoleum. Thunder rattled the windows, and somewhere in the building, a dog barked frantically. The shelter's vet, a brisk but caring woman named Dr. Molina, gave her a quick look over, confirming she was dehydrated but not physically injured. "She's been through something," Dr. Molina said, eyes softening. "Trauma. Maybe worse." Marcus sat beside Harper's kennel long after his shift ended. He watched her flinch from every noise, saw her eyes dart from shadow to shadow. He recognized something in her, an ache for connection, buried beneath layers of fear. Rain lashed the windows. In the quiet moments, Marcus found himself talking to Harper, not expecting a response but needing to fill the space. "You're safe here, Harper. No one's going to hurt you." The dog only shivered harder. That night, as the storm howled outside, Harper refused to leave the suitcase, refused to sleep, and Marcus, haunted by memories of his sister and by the weight of a dog's brokenness, wondered if he was in over his head. But somewhere deep inside, both of them carried the same question. Was a second chance possible even now? As lightning split the sky, Marcus made a silent promise. Tomorrow he'd try again. And neither he nor Harper could have guessed how much that promise would change both their lives. At sunrise, the storm had left behind puddles on the shelter's cracked pavement and a heavy, salt-laced silence. Inside, the Santa Monica Animal Shelter stirred awake to the sound of clanging food bowls and the steady routine of morning chores. But in Kennel 12, time seemed frozen. Harper hadn't slept. Her head was buried against the battered suitcase, paws gripping the faded blanket, eyes rimmed red from exhaustion and fear. No matter how many times Marcus or the other staff checked in, she barely blinked. Not even the soft coos from Janine, the senior volunteer, or the gentle words from Dr. Molina could coax Harper to lift her head. Outside her cage, staff gathered to read the note again, passing it between them as if it were a secret code. The words, "I tried, but he's broken," echoed in Marcus's mind, a cruel refrain. He wondered who had written it, who had loved Harper enough to try, but not enough to stay. Janine sighed, shaking her head. "It takes a lot to break a dog like that. Something must have happened." Dr. Molina, still in her green scrubs and barely awake, studied Harper through the bars. "I see it sometimes. Trauma, abandonment, neglect, maybe worse. There's no telling, but she's not dangerous. She's just gone inside herself." She made notes on her clipboard and quietly added, "Don't get too attached, Marcus. We see a lot of sad cases. Some turn around, some don't." But Marcus was already attached, and he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way Harper's suffering mirrored his own private pain. Or maybe it was simply the way she clung to that suitcase, refusing to let go of the past. That morning, as rainwater dripped from the eaves and seagulls called over the parking lot, Marcus did his rounds in a daze. Every so often he'd pass by Harper's kennel, watching her eyes follow nothing, fixed somewhere beyond the walls. She didn't bark, whine, or pace. She only stared, every muscle locked. At lunch, he sat at his desk with a cold sandwich, the words from the note haunting him. Broken. He knew what that felt like. The world telling you that you were too much work, too complicated to love. He thought of his sister, lost years ago to her own storms, the kind people didn't see. Some days, Marcus still heard her laughter in the quiet, or her voice in his dreams. He wrote about her sometimes in the margins of his journal, scrawled reminders to keep going, even when it felt pointless. Later, as the shelter emptied and the last dog was walked, Marcus lingered by Harper's kennel. The shelter's policy was strict. Don't linger, Don't form attachments. Don't make promises you can't keep. But rules had never comforted him, not when it came to loneliness or grief. He sat down on the cool floor and pulled out his favorite book, a battered copy of The Wind in the Willows. "You mind if I read to you?" he asked softly, opening to the first page. Harper didn't move, but her ears flicked. Just once, barely perceptible. It was enough. He began to read, his voice low, almost a whisper, the words spilling out into the dim kennel. "There is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats." Maybe she couldn't understand the story, but the rhythm seemed to soothe her, just a little. Time stretched. He read through a chapter, then two, watching Harper's breathing slow, her body relaxing by a fraction. Marcus kept his distance, careful not to overstep, but he made a habit that night. He'd come back every evening, reading and talking, even if Harper never responded. Some of the younger staff whispered about him, calling it a waste of time, but Janine watched with knowing eyes. "Sometimes it takes one broken heart to heal another," she said, offering Marcus a tired smile. But even with his efforts, Harper stayed locked in her silence. She ignored food. She flinched at the sound of keys or the bark of another dog. She refused to look at Marcus or anyone. All she wanted was the suitcase and the blanket, her only anchors in a world that had been nothing but storms. That night, Marcus found himself dreaming of his sister, her face blurred, her voice calling to him from somewhere just out of reach. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, the image of Harper's terrified eyes fresh in his mind. He sat up, wiped the sweat from his brow, and promised himself he would try again. He couldn't save his sister, but maybe, just maybe, he could save this dog. Back at the shelter the next morning, Marcus felt the weight of unspoken rules. Shelter staff cannot adopt animals under their direct care. It was meant to keep boundaries clear, but to Marcus, it felt like another cage, another wall between himself and the connection he longed for. He pushed the thought away and sat by Harper's kennel again, book in hand, voice gentle and steady. "You don't have to come out," he whispered, "but I'll be here as long as you need." Harper, still curled around her suitcase, didn't respond. But Mark, more determined than ever, knew that sometimes the smallest cracks were how the light got in. As he finished his shift, the note's words still echoed in his mind, mingling with memories, regrets, and a fragile hope. Maybe no one is ever truly broken. Maybe all anyone needs is someone willing to sit quietly, to keep showing up, no matter how long it takes. That night, with the city quiet and the pier shining in the distance, Marcus made a new promise. This time not just to Harper, but to himself. Whatever it took, he would find a way through the walls. For both their sakes, the storm was over, but the real work, the slow, stubborn fight for trust, had only just begun. The following days at the Santa Monica Animal Shelter unfolded with a slow, stubborn rhythm. The storm outside had cleared, but inside Kennel 12, another kind of storm raged on, a silent, invisible battle between trust and fear. Marcus kept to his quiet ritual. Each morning and night, he stopped by Harper's kennel, a battered copy of The Wind in the Willows, tucked beneath his arm, and a pocket full of dog treats he never expected her to take. The staff teased him gently, Janine with her warm, knowing smile, and even Dr. Molina, who shook her head but watched with a glimmer of hope. Every time Marcus entered the kennel room, he'd lower himself to the cool linoleum, careful not to make any sudden moves. He would speak softly, never too loud or eager. He let Harper decide if she wanted to listen, always respecting the invisible barrier she put between herself and the world. Sometimes as he read or talked, he would see the smallest flicker of movement, a subtle twitch of Harper's ear, the tiniest shift in her body, as if she was slowly, cautiously opening to the possibility that this man, at least, meant no harm. One evening, after the shelter had closed and the last volunteers had gone home, Marcus found himself lingering by Harper's kennel. He spoke to her about nothing and everything: how the ocean looked at sunset, how the pier bustled with life, even how he missed his sister, whose absence colored every quiet moment with a deep ache. "You know," Marcus said, voice just above a whisper, "sometimes I think the hardest part is not the loneliness. It's remembering what it felt like to belong." For the first time, Harper's head lifted just enough for her eyes to meet his. The look was brief, but it hit Marcus with a force he hadn't expected. It was as if, for one trembling moment, Harper understood. That tiny breakthrough lit a spark inside Marcus. He began journaling about it that night, pouring his hopes and fears into a spiral notebook he kept hidden in his work bag. In one entry, he wrote, "Harper's like me, stuck behind glass, waiting for someone patient enough to stay." The shelter's routine was relentless: feeding, cleaning, walking, endless paperwork, and a stream of anxious animals seeking comfort. But for Marcus, the highlight of each day became those quiet moments with Harper. He tried every gentle trick, offering a treat through the bars, leaving toys nearby, even softly humming old lullabies his mother once sang. Progress was slow. Sometimes it felt like nothing at all. Harper refused to eat if anyone watched her, and she remained wary of any hand reaching into her space. But every now and then, a miracle happened. She'd nudge a treat closer with her nose or let out a soft, uncertain whine when Marcus finished a chapter and stood to leave. Janine noticed the changes too. One morning, she found Marcus sitting outside Harper's kennel, a cup of coffee cooling at his side and a look of tired hope on his face. "You're making a difference," she said, crouching beside him. "She's not the same dog we found on that pier." Marcus managed a tired smile. "It's just a flicker. I'm afraid if I push too hard, she'll shut down again." Janine nodded. "That's how it goes with hearts that have been broken. They come back a piece at a time. Like your sister, remember?" Marcus's eyes softened. "Yeah, like her." The mention of his sister brought a bittersweet memory. He remembered visiting her in the hospital, how she'd flinched at the sound of footsteps, the way she'd clung to an old scarf for comfort. He'd always wondered if he'd done enough, if just being there, quietly, stubbornly, had meant something to her. Maybe, he thought, this was his second chance to get it right. The shelter manager, Mr. Leeds, stopped by Harper's kennel one afternoon. He was all business, glasses perched low on his nose, clipboard in hand. "Marcus, I know you care. But remember, staff aren't allowed to adopt animals in their direct care. We can't make exceptions, not even for special cases." Marcus nodded, the words stinging like cold rain. "I know, sir." Leeds lingered for a moment, eyeing Harper. "But you can help her get ready for someone else, someone who can give her a new home." The reminder was sharp, a bittersweet hope taking root in Marcus's heart. He wanted nothing more than to take Harper home, to make her a part of his world. But shelter rules drew a hard line he couldn't cross. Days slipped by, marked by small victories and setbacks. One afternoon, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the whole shelter tensed. Marcus found Harper pressed against the back of her kennel, shivering, but not hiding beneath the blanket for the first time. He sat beside her, reading aloud, as the rain tapped the roof overhead. At the end of his shift, as he stood to leave, Harper's tail, just for a second, flicked against the ground. It was a barely there movement, but Marcus's heart soared. He pretended not to notice, giving Harper the space to process her bravery. That night, he wrote in his journal, "She wagged her tail, just once, that's all it took. Sometimes hope is a whisper, not a shout." As the shelter closed for the night, Marcus paused in the empty hallway, the echoes of barking fading behind him. For the first time in a long while, he felt the faintest thread of optimism weaving through his sadness. Harper was changing, slowly, haltingly, but changing all the same. And though he knew he might not be the one to give her a forever home, Marcus held on to a bittersweet hope. Maybe, just maybe, love, patient, persistent love, could still make a difference, even for the most wounded hearts. 1 week later, the air at the shelter felt thick with anticipation and the wild energy of another coming storm. All day the sky brooded over Santa Monica, the clouds pressing lower, rumbling threats of thunder that made the walls of the animal shelter feel even closer. Marcus had grown used to watching the world through the eyes of the damaged and forgotten. He noticed every little flinch, every muscle twitch, every change in the rhythm of a frightened heart. Harper, too, had changed in these days. She was still wary, still tense, but the once constant trembling had eased. She no longer cowered every time someone walked by. Some days she even rose to greet Marcus with a cautious lift of her head or a soft, questioning sound when he read to her. Hope, fragile and new, was beginning to sprout. That evening, the shelter closed early, with staff hurrying to finish their rounds before the worst of the weather hit. The city was under a severe storm watch. Warnings flashed on everyone's phones, and the distant wail of sirens echoed over the rain. Janine and Marcus shared a quiet moment by the staff room window, watching fat raindrops streak the glass. "You heading out soon?" Janine asked, voice low. Marcus shook his head. "Just want to check on Harper one more time." Janine smiled. "She's lucky to have you." Marcus returned the smile, feeling a warm ache in his chest. "I think I'm the lucky one." He walked the hallway, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, the usual chorus of restless animals now subdued by the storm's oppressive energy. As Marcus rounded the corner, a sudden deafening crash shook the building, the sound of metal and glass giving way. The lights flickered, a ceiling fan somewhere overhead let out a sickening squeal, and in the next instant, pandemonium erupted. Dogs barked in panic, cats yowled, and somewhere something crashed hard to the floor. Marcus's heart pounded. He rushed toward Harper's kennel, his mind racing. He found her in a frenzy, eyes wide, body shaking, claws scrabbling at the floor. Before he could reach her, another sharp crack of thunder boomed, rattling the windows. Harper bolted, ramming her body into the kennel door just as an emergency sensor tripped. The latch gave way, swinging wide, and Harper slipped out, fur slick with fear, desperate for escape. "Harper! Wait!" Marcus's voice barely cut through the chaos. For a split second, their eyes met, hers wild, pleading. Then she was gone, a blur of motion heading down the hallway, slipping through the side door that a panicked volunteer had left ajar in the confusion. Marcus sprinted after her, nearly colliding with Janine in the corridor. "She's out. Harper's loose." Janine's face paled. "She'll get lost in this storm." Without a thought, they plunged outside, the rain immediately soaking them to the bone. Lightning split the sky, the pier lights flickering in the distance, waves crashing louder than ever before. The city seemed to close in, the storm turning every alley into a river, every shadow into a threat. Together, Marcus and Janine searched, shouting Harper's name, combing the parking lot, then the streets near the shelter, then the drenched boardwalk leading toward the pier. Guilt tore at Marcus. He replayed every decision, every moment he might have done more to make Harper feel safe. "Come on, Harper. Come back. Please." His words dissolved into the wind. Janine tried to reassure him, but the fear in her own eyes betrayed her worry. Harper, lost and panicked, was alone in a city that had already failed her once. Time stretched painfully. Rain pounded down, visibility shrinking to a blur. Marcus slipped, nearly falling, but kept moving, driven by something deeper than protocol or duty. Driven by the knowledge that sometimes a heart only needed one person not to give up. When he finally spotted the battered suitcase, right there at the edge of the same pier where it had all started, his heart caught in his throat. Harper was there, curled up tight against the faded luggage, her body soaked and shivering, tail wrapped around herself for comfort. Marcus approached slowly, remembering every lesson he'd learned these last few weeks about fear, trust, and second chances. He didn't rush her. He dropped to one knee a few yards away, holding out an old faded scarf, the same one his sister had clung to during her hardest days, the one Marcus had kept with him all these years. "Harper," he called, voice thick with hope and memory. "I'm right here. It's okay, girl. You're not alone. Not anymore." At first, Harper stayed frozen, barely breathing. But as Marcus softly spoke, she inched closer, drawn to the gentle tone, the familiar smell of the scarf, and the warmth in Marcus's presence. Inch by inch, she closed the gap, finally pressing her nose to the fabric and letting out a long, shuddering sigh. Janine watched from a distance, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. In that moment, something unspoken passed between Marcus and Harper, a deep, wordless promise. No matter what happened next, they belonged to each other in a way only those who've been broken and found can understand. The storm still raged, but for a heartbeat, time stood still. Marcus wrapped Harper in the scarf, cradled her gently, and with Janine's help, carried her back toward the shelter. Harper didn't resist. She leaned against Marcus, her eyes closing, the battered suitcase held close by her side. Back inside, as staff rushed to restore order and check on the animals, Marcus and Janine dried Harper off, wrapping her in blankets, soothing her with quiet words. The shelter manager gave a stern lecture about safety protocols, but Marcus barely heard it. He was focused only on Harper, who, for the first time, let herself be touched without recoiling. That night, as the storm finally passed and the city grew quiet again, Marcus sat with Harper, the scarf around her neck, the battered suitcase at her side. The world outside was full of rules and limitations, but inside that small space, something miraculous had happened. Trust had begun to bloom. And in that fragile peace, Marcus dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, second chances were real, even for those the world had nearly given up on. A week after the storm, the Santa Monica Animal Shelter hummed with quiet anticipation. Harper had become something of a legend among the staff, a symbol of what could happen when a dog and a human both refused to give up. Marcus noticed the change in the atmosphere, felt it in the way people spoke more gently near Kennel 12, or in how Janine left little notes of encouragement taped to the glass. Even Mr. Leeds, the stern shelter manager, seemed softer, stopping by with an extra treat or a rare smile. Harper still clung to her battered suitcase and the faded scarf tied around her neck, but there was a new spark in her eyes. She'd begun eating with the staff watching, wagging her tail and, on rare, precious mornings, letting Marcus scratch behind her ears for a moment before retreating back to her safe zone. The local news had picked up Harper's story, sharing it on TV and online. "Abandoned dog finds hope at shelter after storm," the headlines read, and suddenly the phone at the front desk rang with calls from curious strangers and potential adopters. Most of them, Marcus sensed, were simply looking for a happy ending to share, a story to feel good about. But on a rainy Saturday afternoon, a young couple walked into the lobby with something different in their eyes. Sarah and Jonah Miller were in their early 30s, hands clasped tightly, moving with the careful, deliberate grace of people who had weathered their own private storms. Jonah's hair was graying at the temples, his posture slightly stooped. Sarah's face was open but tinged with sorrow. They waited patiently as Marcus finished mopping up a spill in the hallway, never raising their voices, never rushing the staff. When Marcus finally approached, Sarah gave him a gentle smile. "We saw Harper's story on the news. We lost our daughter last year. We thought maybe, just maybe, we could help her. And maybe she could help us too." The words struck Marcus in a place that hadn't healed. Even after all these years, he felt a sudden kinship with the Millers, a quiet understanding that some griefs were too big to put into words. He led them down the hallway, past barking dogs and nervous cats, to where Harper lay curled in her kennel. Jonah hung back, but Sarah knelt in front of the glass, her face level with Harper's, and began to read aloud from a small, battered book she'd pulled from her purse. Her voice was low, steady, never pushy, echoing Marcus's approach. For the first time with strangers, Harper didn't bolt or cower. She watched Sarah, eyes bright with curiosity and longing. She let out a soft, tentative whine, pawing at the glass, and Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Jonah joined them, kneeling beside his wife. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn handkerchief, and pressed it to his eyes. "We know she's been through a lot," he said, his voice rough. "But so have we. We're not looking for a perfect dog, just a chance to give someone, anyone, a new start." Marcus glanced at Janine, who was watching from the office doorway, hope and worry mixed on her face. Marcus's heart ached. He wanted Harper to find a family, wanted her to feel safe and loved, but he also wanted, selfishly, to keep her close, to protect her from another disappointment. Shelter rules were clear. Marcus couldn't adopt Harper, and the Millers seemed like exactly the kind of people Harper needed. The adoption process began, but not without its own tension. Marcus had to step aside, watching as Sarah and Jonah sat for hours, reading and talking softly to Harper, offering treats and waiting for her to make the first move. It wasn't easy. Harper was wary at first, sometimes backing away, sometimes barking softly as if testing their intentions. But the Millers never pushed. They simply sat, patient and open, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking in the gentle language of those who have lost and learned to love again. The final test came 3 days later. The Millers were given permission to take Harper for a walk around the shelter's small garden. Marcus stood back, heart pounding, as Harper stepped cautiously outside. At first, she refused to budge from the doorway, the wind ruffling her fur, the newness of everything making her tremble. Sarah sat in the grass, reading her book, pretending not to notice. Jonah tossed a soft ball gently nearby, never making sudden moves. Slowly, Harper crept forward, drawn by the sound of Sarah's voice, the smell of fresh grass, and the warmth of sunlight on her fur. For a long while, she simply stood close, not touching, just sharing the same space. Then, as if deciding something deep inside, she took another step, then another, until she stood beside Sarah. With a soft, shuddering breath, Harper rested her head in Sarah's lap. The moment broke something inside Marcus, a bittersweet relief so sharp it almost hurt. Jonah knelt beside his wife and their new dog, his eyes shining with gratitude and grief and hope all tangled together. Harper let herself be led away from the kennel for the first time without panic. She walked beside the Millers, tail wagging slowly, the battered suitcase and scarf carried behind by Marcus, hands trembling with pride and sorrow. The staff gathered to watch, some wiping away tears, others clapping softly. Shelter policy had been followed, but hearts had been changed in ways no rulebook could measure. That night, as Marcus sat alone in the break room, staring at the empty kennel and the worn spot where Harper used to sleep, he understood what it meant to love without holding on too tightly. Some stories, he realized, are about letting go, about trusting that even the most broken can find their way home, if only someone believes in them long enough to help them try. The day of Harper's adoption was a rare burst of California sunshine after weeks of gray. The Santa Monica Animal Shelter decorated its modest lobby with yellow streamers and a hand-lettered sign that read, "Second Chances." Janine made punch and set out homemade cookies, her eyes bright with pride and sadness as she watched the preparations. Marcus arrived early, holding Harper's battered suitcase in one hand and the faded scarf in the other, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and hope. The Millers, Sarah in a bright floral dress and Jonah with a nervous smile, waited quietly by the front desk, their hands intertwined, as if drawing strength from each other and the gravity of the day. People from the community wandered in, drawn by the story they'd seen on the news. Some came just to see Harper, others to drop off donations or offer kind words to the staff. Mr. Leeds, the shelter manager, gave a brief but heartfelt speech about the importance of second chances and the power of compassion. He thanked the Millers for opening their home and hearts to a dog who'd once been written off as broken. Then Janine, wiping a tear from her cheek, stepped up and spoke with a warmth that filled the room. "Harper taught us all something about patience, about the courage to start over, and about the quiet power of kindness. She's a survivor, and today, she gets the new beginning she deserves." The lobby erupted in applause, and for a moment, the weight of Harper's past seemed to lift. Marcus knelt beside her, attaching the leash to her collar, hands trembling just a little. He pressed the battered suitcase into Sarah's hands, along with the scarf, and a handwritten note he'd agonized over the night before. "She is braver than she knows." His throat tightened as he watched Sarah carefully tuck the note into the suitcase alongside the blanket Harper had clung to for so long. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, squeezing Marcus's hand. Jonah nodded, unable to find words. Harper, sensing the change, pressed herself against Marcus's leg one last time before letting herself be guided by Sarah and Jonah. The goodbye was as public as it was personal. The staff formed a small corridor, clapping and cheering as Harper trotted, head high, tail wagging, toward the exit with her new family. A few children in the crowd waved small paper flags that read, "Good luck, Harper," and a local reporter snapped photos, the camera flash momentarily illuminating the mix of tears and joy on every face. Marcus stood back, hands shaking, trying to hold his composure. He was proud, so proud it ached, and yet it was a loss too, a hole in his heart shaped like a German shepherd and a battered suitcase. When Harper paused at the door, she turned and locked eyes with Marcus. For a breathless second, the room fell silent. It was as if she was saying thank you, as if she was promising that everything he had given, every gentle word, every night reading by her kennel, had mattered. Then, with a final flick of her tail, she walked out into the sunlight with her new family, leaving the shelter that had been her world. Marcus stayed behind as the lobby emptied, the echo of celebration giving way to a gentle hush. He helped Janine clean up, both of them lingering over the remains of cookies and half-empty cups of punch. Janine tried to comfort him. You gave her everything she needed to trust again. That's more than most ever get. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard, his eyes misty. Letting go hurts, but it's the right thing. Janine patted his hand. We'll see her again, Marcus. You never know what life brings back around. That night, Marcus wandered the Santa Monica Pier as the sky melted into indigo and gold, the sea breeze washing away the sticky heat of the day. He walked past the empty bench where he'd first found Harper, feeling the familiar ache of memory, the kind that's sharp but not bitter, full of gratitude and longing all at once. He sat and let his thoughts drift to his sister, to the ghosts of regrets and hopes that never fully faded. In some small, quiet way, helping Harper had helped him too. It was a piece of healing he hadn't known he needed. When Marcus finally returned home, he pulled out his journal and wrote for hours. He wrote about the quiet dignity of loving and letting go, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to give someone else the chance to move forward without you. He wrote about the brokenness in all of us, the wounds that never fully close but that can become the place where light gets in. He wrote, Harper's story isn't just hers, it's mine too. It's for everyone who's ever lost, ever loved, ever hoped for one more chance. Sleep came late and was restless. In his dreams, Marcus saw Harper running along the beach, her ears flying, her bark echoing over the waves. He saw his sister waving from the water's edge, smiling, whole and free. He woke with the sunrise, the sadness softer, the hope a little stronger. At the shelter, life went on. New animals arrived, some scared, some sick, all needing the same patience and love. Marcus found himself by a new kennel, a tiny dog trembling in the corner, and he knelt to begin again, voice gentle, presence steady, believing that every goodbye was also a new beginning. And somewhere out there, under the bright California sky, Harper was starting her new life, carrying a piece of all of them with her, a testament to the power of second chances and the quiet, unstoppable force of hope. Weeks slipped by, folding gently into a new rhythm neither Marcus nor the shelter had quite expected. The hole Harper left was felt in quiet ways, a vacant space at the end of Kennel Row, a missing voice during evening walks, the soft absence that lingered in the air like the echo of a favorite song. Marcus threw himself into the work, comforting new arrivals, mentoring younger staff, and finding solace in the slow, patient rituals that had once coaxed Harper back from the edge. Yet every so often, he'd catch himself glancing at the battered old scarf still folded in his desk drawer, or at the line in his journal where he'd written, "She is braver than she knows." The shelter had changed since Harper's adoption. People stopped in, asking about her, telling their own stories of loss or hope, sometimes leaving donations or signing up to volunteer. The local news kept Harper's memory alive, running a follow-up story about her new family, her transformation, and the way her journey had inspired the community. Marcus felt a quiet pride in those moments, even as he missed the gentle weight of Harper's gaze. He clung to the hope that she was happy, thriving, running along some sunlit path with the Millers, safe at last. Then, one Thursday afternoon, as Marcus finished a shift and was headed out into the late summer warmth, he saw a familiar car pull into the shelter lot. At first, he thought he was imagining it, the flash of blue paint, the dent in the passenger door. But then he saw Sarah and Jonah Miller step out, their faces beaming, and there, tail wagging, head high, was Harper. The reunion was a whirlwind of emotion. Harper spotted Marcus and bounded across the parking lot. Her gait stronger, her fur glossier, eyes bright with excitement. She stopped just short of him, sitting and offering a paw, her head cocked as if to say, "See?" I remember you." Marcus dropped to his knees, unable to hide his tears, and hugged her fiercely. "Hey girl, you look amazing." Harper nuzzled into his shoulder, her whole body vibrating with happiness. Sarah and Jonah approached, both looking tired but radiant. Sarah's arms were full of thank you cards and photos, snapshots of Harper sleeping in the sun, chasing balls at the park, lying at Jonah's feet while he read in his favorite chair. "She's changed everything for us," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "But the real reason we're here is to thank you. Harper saved Jonah's life last week." Marcus blinked, his hand still resting gently on Harper's neck. "What happened?" Jonah smiled, a little embarrassed but clearly moved. "I had a heart episode. I didn't even realize what was happening. I thought I was just tired. But Harper wouldn't let me rest. She barked, pawed at my chest, even ran and got Sarah. She wouldn't stop until Sarah came to check on me. By the time we got to the hospital, the doctor said if we'd waited even another hour, things might have gone much worse. She saved me." Sarah nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "She's not just our dog, she's our hero." They hugged Harper tight, both of them sniffling. "We wanted you to know. We wanted you to see that your faith in her changed our lives. She's not just surviving, she's thriving." Word of Harper's heroism spread quickly through the shelter. Janine rushed out to the lot, throwing her arms around Marcus and Harper, then dragging them all inside to celebrate. The staff gathered in the break room, laughing and crying as Sarah and Jonah recounted the story again. Marcus noticed how Harper seemed different now, confident, relaxed, her eyes scanning the room for familiar faces, tail wagging as she soaked up the attention. Later, as the celebration quieted, Sarah and Jonah lingered in the shelter's garden, watching Harper sniff at the flowers and play gently with a nervous puppy. "She's teaching us how to hope again," Jonah confessed quietly to Marcus. "We were so lost after our daughter. We thought we'd never be whole. But Harper helped us start living again." Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand. "You gave us back our family. We can never thank you enough." Marcus felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, relief, wonder. He realized that what they had all done for Harper, Harper was now doing for others. Her story still rippling outwards in ways none of them could have predicted. As the sun dipped low over Santa Monica, Marcus walked Harper one last time around the garden. They paused by the old oak tree, watching the light filter through the leaves, painting everything gold. Marcus knelt, stroking Harper's head. "You did good, girl. You proved everyone wrong." Harper licked his hand, tail sweeping the grass, eyes shining with affection and understanding. Before the Millers left, they posed for a final photo, Harper in the middle, flanked by Marcus, Sarah, and Jonah, everyone grinning through their tears. As the car pulled away, Marcus stood by the door, waving until they disappeared around the corner. His heart felt lighter, his grief softened by the knowledge that hope, once planted, can grow in the most unexpected places. The story of Harper's rescue and transformation brought more than visitors and volunteers. It inspired the community to donate, adopt, and believe again in second chances, not just for animals, but for themselves and each other. And for Marcus, it cemented the truth he'd been learning all along. Sometimes, in saving another, you save yourself. Harper had come full circle, from broken and abandoned to hero and healer. And in that journey, she'd brought a whole world with her. Word of Harper's heroism swept through the Santa Monica community faster than Marcus could have imagined. The local paper ran her photo with Jonah and Sarah, the headline reading, "Rescue Dog Saves Owner, Inspires Shelter and City." The shelter's phones rang non-stop, people asking about adoptions, volunteering, and even seeking comfort for their own losses. Some callers just wanted to thank the staff for sharing Harper's story, confessing that it had given them hope on dark days. Donations came in: blankets, food, even old suitcases decorated with notes that read, "For the next Harper." The shelter's walls, once plain and functional, began to fill with cards, children's drawings of German shepherds, and letters from people moved by the tale of a broken dog who found her place and her purpose. With the newfound attention came new responsibility. Marcus, moved by the overwhelming response, realized that the shelter could become more than just a place for stray animals. It could be a haven for healing, for both people and pets alike. He remembered the pain he had carried for years after his sister's passing, the heavy silence he'd filled with work and routine, never daring to hope for true connection. Harper had changed that. She'd shown him, and so many others, that healing came not from erasing loss, but from sharing it, letting it soften the heart instead of hardening it. Inspired by Harper's journey, Marcus started a support group at the shelter for people grieving loved ones. The meetings began quietly at first, a handful of regulars who sat in a circle on folding chairs, nervously holding cups of tea, their eyes cast down. Marcus would open each session with a gentle story, sometimes about his sister, sometimes about Harper or another shelter animal that had learned to trust again. The words mattered, but it was Harper's presence that made the difference. On the days the Millers brought her in, she would quietly pad among the group, pausing to rest her head on a knee or nuzzle a trembling hand. People who hadn't spoken in weeks found themselves reaching out, comforted by the simple warmth of a dog who had known loss and fear, but chose connection instead. One night, an elderly man named George broke down in tears as Harper sat quietly beside him. "I thought I was done," he whispered, stroking her fur with shaking hands. "But if she can start over, maybe I can too." After the meeting, Janine found Marcus wiping his eyes in the break room. "You did good," she said softly, squeezing his shoulder. "This place, it's different now. People come for more than a pet. They come to remember they're not alone." The shelter became busier than ever. Adoptions rose as people arrived, hearts open, inspired by Harper's transformation. The community, once content to keep its distance from the sad stories behind the shelter doors, now rallied around them. Children held bake sales for supplies, local businesses donated building materials, and the mayor himself stopped by to read to the animals and share Harper's story at a city council meeting. Harper herself became a local celebrity. She visited schools and nursing homes, spreading comfort and hope. Her own story a living example that no one is ever truly beyond healing. Children who had trouble reading found courage to try aloud if Harper was listening. Her calm presence a gentle nudge. At the shelter, Marcus watched it all with humble wonder. Each new face, each story, each hesitant hand reaching for a frightened dog or cat. It was as if Harper's spirit had infected the entire building, breathing new life into old walls, and with every adoption, every reunion, every second chance, Marcus felt himself healing too. He still thought often of his sister. Some nights, after a long day, he'd walk the pier alone, feeling the ocean wind on his face and remembering her laugh, her stubbornness, her way of seeing the world's beauty even through pain. Harper's journey reminded him that those we lose never truly leave. They echo through our choices, our kindness, our willingness to risk our hearts again. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus watched as Harper curled up next to a nervous teenager named Lily, who had lost her father in a car accident. Lily's mother had brought her to the shelter hoping a pet might bring her comfort, but Lily had barely spoken in weeks. That day, as Harper gently nudged her hand and lay at her feet, Lily whispered something no one else could hear, her face softening. Later, her mother hugged Marcus and cried. It's like she knew exactly what Lily needed. Moments like that became the new measure of success at the shelter. It was no longer about numbers, how many animals adopted, how many cages cleaned, but about the slow, steady growth of trust, connection, and hope. Marcus finally felt at peace, proud of the team, the volunteers, the city, and most of all, the dog who had come in broken and left everyone else a little more whole. Harper had become more than a mascot. She was living proof that healing was possible, that one gentle heart could change the course of so many lives. As summer faded to fall, the shelter held an open house. People lined up around the block, eager to meet Harper and hear her story. Marcus stood at the entrance, greeting visitors, grateful for the laughter, the light, and the way the world seemed just a little brighter than before. That night, as the sun set behind the pier, Marcus walked home beneath a sky streaked with gold, carrying in his heart the lesson Harper had taught him and so many others. True healing comes from connection, from presence, from never giving up on hope, even when the world tells you it's impossible. The battered suitcase, still tucked away in a quiet corner of Marcus's office, had become more than just a relic of Harper's past. It was a symbol now. Visitors to the shelter would ask about it, sometimes running their hands gently across its faded surface as if touching the pain and the promise it represented. The note inside, "I tried, but he's broken," had long since dried, but the words still echoed in Marcus's mind on quiet nights. At first, that message had haunted him, the idea that anyone, human or animal, could be truly, irreparably broken. But as he looked around the shelter now, he saw only proof to the contrary. Animals once too frightened to approach a hand, now leaping into loving arms. People once closed off by grief, now laughing and connecting as they volunteered or sat in the support group circle. The suitcase was still battered, still marked by its journey, but it was not empty. It carried the scarf, the blanket, and the story of a dog who had not just survived, but transformed her world. Marcus spent more time reflecting these days, both in his journal and in conversations with Janine. On slow afternoons, they'd sit on the shelter's back steps, sipping coffee, and marvel at the ripple effect of Harper's journey. "It's like a stone in a pond," Janine said one afternoon, watching children playing in the garden with a pack of rescued puppies. "You don't always see how far the ripples go." Marcus smiled, watching the light in her eyes. "Sometimes I think Harper saved us more than we saved her." He wrote in his journal, "Brokenness doesn't mean worthlessness. It's just a chapter, one that can change with patience and love." He thought about the people who had joined the support group. Some had never owned a pet. Some were recovering from illness, divorce, or the death of a child. All of them, in their own way, had been searching for hope. Harper, with her gentle presence and her story of survival, had become a beacon, a living testament to the possibility of change. Her ability to trust again, after all she'd endured, mirrored the very process Marcus and so many others faced in their own lives. They came to the shelter expecting to give something to a wounded animal, only to find that the healing flowed both ways. One evening, as the last rays of sun slanted across the lobby floor, Marcus found himself alone with the suitcase. He opened it, ran his fingers over the scarf, and reread the note. This time he didn't feel anger or sorrow. He felt compassion, for the person who had loved Harper but couldn't stay, for everyone who had ever tried and fallen short. He understood now that letting go was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. The suitcase and note had once meant abandonment, But now they meant survival, courage, and the willingness to rewrite a painful story. The shelter had changed, but so had Marcus. The loss of his sister no longer weighed on him like an anchor. He realized he had honored her memory not by holding on to the pain, but by letting it open his heart to others. The real lesson he saw was that small acts of kindness, a gentle word, a patient touch, a willingness to sit quietly with another's pain, could change the course of a life. He saw it in Harper's journey, but also in his own, in the way he'd learned to forgive himself, to reach out for help, and to trust that new beginnings were possible at any age. One afternoon, the shelter hosted a community open mic. People shared stories of loss, hope, and resilience. A young woman who'd lost her job and confidence read a poem about a cat she'd adopted who taught her to try again. An elderly widower spoke of a shy terrier who slept at his feet, easing his loneliness. Marcus told Harper's story, how she'd been abandoned, frightened, and labeled as broken, and how her willingness to trust again had changed not just her life, but the lives of so many around her. Harper's story, he said, isn't about never falling apart. It's about finding someone willing to sit with you until you're ready to try again. The crowd listened, silent and moved, as Harper lay at his feet, her head on his shoe, her tail thumping softly whenever anyone spoke to her. Afterward, people came up to Marcus to share their own stories, their own suitcases and notes, reminders that we all carry burdens, and that compassion is the key to opening them. Marcus closed the night sitting outside with Harper, watching the stars appear over the ocean. He thought about all the little choices that had brought him here. The nights he'd sat beside Harper's kennel reading aloud, the times he'd almost given up, the morning he'd handed her leash to the Millers and watched her walk into a new life. Every act of kindness, he realized, plants a seed, sometimes in the heart of another, sometimes in your own, and you never know which will grow. In the weeks that followed, the shelter's momentum continued. More animals found homes, more people joined the support group, and a sense of hope lingered in every corner. Marcus kept the suitcase and the note on a shelf above his desk, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of what was possible. He shared the story often, telling new volunteers and visitors that sometimes the greatest transformation comes from the most unlikely beginnings. Every soul, he'd say, animal or human, can heal with time, patience, and love. Brokenness is just a page. It's never the whole story. The message spread beyond the shelter, touching people who'd never met Harper, never seen the suitcase, but who recognized themselves in the story of a second chance. And through it all, Marcus knew that hope was never wasted, that every small act mattered, and every story, no matter how broken, could find its way to a new ending. There is a quiet magic to the way stories come full circle, finding endings that are not endings at all but new beginnings woven from the threads of what came before. As autumn settled over Santa Monica, with ocean breezes rustling dry leaves along the pier, Marcus stood once more at the edge of the shore, where the battered suitcase had first been left, where Harper's journey had begun, and where his own heart had started to heal. He watched the waves roll in, endless and patient, carrying memories and hope in equal measure. These days, the shelter pulsed with life and promise. Marcus could see it in the eager faces of the volunteers, the excited chatter of families adopting new pets, and the gentle laughter echoing through the kennels. He made it a ritual now. Every morning, he'd open the doors, walk the halls, and whisper to the animals, "You're safe. You're wanted. You belong." Sometimes, he'd pause by a frightened dog cowering in the back of a kennel, kneel down, and begin to read, just as he'd done with Harper. He had learned patience, and the animals, so many of them battered by life, responded to the steady warmth of his presence. Harper herself had become a legend, her story retold in school assemblies, church gatherings, and even in local news broadcasts. She would visit the shelter often, now a symbol of hope and resilience. On those days, she'd race along the beach with Jonah and Sarah, barking joyfully, her coat glossy and her tail waving like a banner. Children would run beside her, laughing, their parents snapping photos and telling their own stories of second chances. Jonah, once wary and weighed down by grief, now moved with a quiet confidence, always pausing to thank Marcus for believing in a dog that others had given up on. Sarah, her eyes bright with love, spoke at community meetings about healing, loss, and the way even a broken heart could learn to trust again. One golden afternoon, the shelter hosted an adoption fair on the sand near the pier. Music played, children chased after bubbles, and rows of eager animals waited for new families. Marcus manned a table covered in photos and keepsakes, Harper's battered suitcase, the faded scarf, and a handwritten message that read, "Every act of kindness plants a seed." He watched as people stopped, touched the suitcase, read the note, and shared stories of their own journeys, moments of despair that had turned, somehow, into hope. He realized with a surge of pride and humility that the shelter had become a living tapestry of such moments: adoptions, reunions, support group milestones, the everyday acts of care that knit a community together. As the sun set, casting everything in warm orange and pink, Marcus took a moment to look back on the long road that had brought him here. He remembered the days after his sister's passing, days when he'd felt as lost as Harper, curled tight around his pain and convinced that no one could reach him. He thought of all the dogs and cats that had come through the shelter's doors, each carrying their own stories of fear and hope. He thought of Harper, shaking in her suitcase, eyes dark with mistrust, and the long, slow thaw of her heart as she learned that kindness could be trusted after all. It struck Marcus then that every act of compassion, no matter how small, was a thread in a much larger tapestry. The simple ritual of reading to a frightened dog, the quiet presence of a volunteer willing to sit through long, silent nights, the choice to believe in a creature or a person when the world called them broken. Each of these, he saw now, was a seed of hope, planted in soil that sometimes looked barren but was always waiting for the right moment to bloom. In the shelter's closing hours, Marcus walked through the kennels one last time. He found a new arrival, a trembling puppy with wide, anxious eyes, and began to read softly, settling into the rhythm that had brought comfort to so many before. He saw the puppy's breathing slow, her body relax, and felt the familiar tug of hope. "It starts with one brave step," he whispered, as if speaking to both of them. Just one. In that simple, quiet space, Marcus understood the lesson Harper had left him with: that the journey from abandonment to belonging is not a straight line, but a path marked by courage, setbacks, forgiveness, and above all, the willingness to try again. That night, Marcus stood on the pier beneath a sky swept clean by ocean wind. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the sound of laughter drifted up from the beach. He thought of all the Harpers still out there, animals and people alike, waiting for someone to notice, to care, to sit quietly with them until the trembling stopped and trust could grow. He thought of the listeners and readers who would hear this story and hoped they would find themselves in its folds, not just as spectators, but as participants, as planters of kindness and seekers of connection. He wanted them to know that every ending holds the seed of a new beginning, that when we open our hearts, even when they've been battered by storms, we change not just another's story, but our own. That the smallest gesture can ripple outward, altering lives in ways we may never see. The battered suitcase was not just a relic. It was a testament to the power of second chances and the courage it takes to give them. As the night deepened and the last of the guests wandered home, Marcus lingered at the edge of the pier, the suitcase beside him. He felt peace, a rare, deep peace, settle in his chest. He knew that the story would live on, not just in memory or in legend, but in every act of kindness inspired by Harper's journey. And as he walked back toward the shelter, Marcus carried with him the conviction that hope, once given, is never truly lost. It simply finds new hands to hold it, new hearts to heal, and new stories to write, again and again, for as long as there are those willing to believe.